All right, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. I'm kind of excited about this segment. I'm excited about all our segments, but this one in particular is with a Bronx author, and he's written a kind of an interesting book about, in a way, Bronx history. But I particularly like that he and some of his relatives live in the same neighborhood that I do in Van Cortlandt Village. So it is my pleasure to say, hey there to David Wayne. Nice to see you, David.
Hi, Gary. Nice to see you.
So David has a novel called The Invisible Hand. And I want to kind of work at this discussion on two levels. One is the historical happenings that defined the context for this story. And then, of course, we'll talk about the story itself. And I should mention, first of all, the book, as David explained to me, is still in production, still being written. But of importance and of note, the second chapter won the Brio Award in 2015, and one of the other chapters won a Brio Award the Bronx recognizes its own last year. So let's just start with the historical context and what inspired you to create a story.
Okay, I mean, those may be two different things, but the historical context, I guess you have three generations of this family who, the first generation is this old Eastern European Jewish Trotskyist who's one of the founders of the amalgamated houses. His son is kind of an FDR Democrat and goes on to be a court clerk in the Bronx, and he's in the Bronx courts at the time that the famous "The Bronx is Burning" and
In the
kind of a
70s, yeah.
yeah, and kind of a witness to some of the misdeeds in the Bronx Democratic Party machine and stuff like that. And then his kids, the grandkids of the Trotskyist, who's no longer alive but shows up in the book as a ghost. His kids, one of them is a real estate attorney and one of them is a real estate developer.
And so from there, you decided to do what? Like what? Like so you knew all about this, and then you said, "Wait a minute, this might be the source or the origin of an interesting story."
Well, I mean, it was a bunch of short stories that I was writing, and really some of them take place in the Bronx or in the York Avenue apartment of the real estate attorney, son of the kind of the main character. The main character's got dementia, and his dementia allows him to do a lot of things, to be in a lot of places, and we're not sure if he's really there or not. But another important part of the book takes place in the Dominican Republic,
Yes.
and where I've spent a lot of time, and there's been an earthquake there in the city of Santiago, and so these real estate developers and some kind of unscrupulous colleagues of theirs are thinking about trying to develop Santiago as, some kind of a resort now that it's been vacated. And uh, one of the friends of Jacob Altman, who's the developer, says to
Mhm.
him, "This is just like the
I
Bronx."
was. It's funny when you said that. I was just going to react in the same way. It sounds like the Bronx. Burn it
Well, he
down,
says,
and or have it destroyed, and then pave paradise, put up a parking lot.
yeah, and the title of the first section comes from his statement. He says, "Jake, this is the Bronx on the beach."
The Bronx on the beach. And just in terms of the writing of it, now it's taken you a while. This isn't one of those that you like kind of set aside a year or a couple of years and just penned. You've been working on this a while. I mean, if the chapter two won a Brio Award in 2015, I can do the math. It's taken you a while. Talk to me about the writing of it.
Yeah, well, it kind of brings it home to me that it's taken a while because I guess that first chapter was submitted when the book was already starting to take shape. So I had already been writing some of these stories for a couple years before that. Um, there are stories and writers who kind of organize everything and outline everything beforehand.
Right.
And then there are writers who start to write and their characters kind of start to guide them or their settings. And that's what's happened with this so that the characters have started to talk to each other and settings have presented themselves, and some of them started to make sense that they ought to go together. And so that's how it kind of turned into a book. And, you know, it's taken me a long time, but at the same time, I have probably 3 books out of the process. There's about 2 books worth of material that I've had to take out of this to make this really
To
coherent.
make it work. But you still have that material. The uh, uh, let's just talk about the Bronx's socialist past, which is in there. Um, Talk about you talk about the decline of the borough from the vantage of the courthouse on the Grand Concourse. Let's just talk about um, Bronx history and how it relates to what it is that you're working on.
Right. When I was a kid, my father was an Episcopal priest, and we lived on Carroll Place and 165th Street. So this stuff was going on all around me. And there's one scene in the book which involves Louis Gigante, and he actually came to dinner at our house. So I
Oh,
kind of missed.
congratulations. That's pretty good. You got some Bronx royalty there.
What kind of? My father was involved in this Bronx Task Force on Arson, I think it was, and
Hmm.
they they met at my house. My mother complained that Father Gigante made her dining table into a political club. Um, I don't remember the dinner, but I remember her talking about it.
Wow.
And I want to say, as I say in the book, that I think that Louis Gigante did great things for people in the South Bronx.
Yeah.
But I
He
took
didn't.
this scene and
No, go ahead.
I put it into an amalgamated apartment, and I put it into this Jewish family with socialist roots. So it kind of became a different thing.
And why did you do that? You like because you were inspired by, frankly, the socialists that founded one of the most stable neighborhoods in the Bronx?
I mean, that's one of the things. Joel Altman is having dementia. He's having a lot of memories of what's
Right.
gone by.
Hmm.
He's having, frankly, visions of things that are happening. And, you know, these people are coming up, some of them who he never met, some of them who he did. And so this kind of bubbles up in his memories. And yeah, I, uh, I also took some stuff as an inspiration from some books by Murray Bookchin, talking about his past growing up in the Bronx, and he became an anarchist theorist. And he talks about
There's a lot of that in our borough. Yeah.
there is, and he talks about just it being, a neighborhood just filled with, all of these different currents of Stalinism and Trotskyism and anarchism and everything else.
There's no question about it. And as I said, we talked about amalgamated housing. This was founded by socialists and people who were like, part of the labor movement way back when. And that strain still exists, not only, I say here, because it is this neighborhood, but elsewhere in the Bronx. I want to ask you one other aspect that pops up, and that's the notion of the supernatural. You have allowed your imagination to fly, so to speak. You want to talk about the influence of the supernatural and how it helps you tell your story?
Yeah, one of the things I
Come
like
on,
to
own up to it. Let's go.
one of the things I like to do when I write is just take, something's going along fairly conventionally and just inject something in it that doesn't make any sense and see if I can make it make sense as things get worked out. And a lot of these people and ideas are ghosts or are becoming ghosts. This is stuff that's being lost in history. I'll give you an example. I have a colleague who he's from another country, and perhaps a little bit anti-Semitic. He says to me one day, Jewish and working class, but that's an oxymoron.
Ay,
So that
ay,
may
ay.
be
That,
perception that
that
people
may
have.
be a little, that's more than a little anti-Semitic, but that's okay.
Yeah, but I mean that's a perception that's out there these days. Whereas the garment workers unions in New York City were
Right.
350,000 workers, and they were overwhelmingly Yiddish speaking.
Yes, and those are the people who founded this housing project. So now you've been working on it a long time. You probably fall asleep thinking about what you're going to write next, and you say, "Well, am I ready to write the next bit?" Do you know how this is all going to be resolved yet? I love getting into an artist's muse. Where are you at? Like, is the thing written, or are you really just kind of getting it out as you go along?
So I know how it's going to be resolved. It's finished from beginning to end, and now I'm kind of polishing language and removing parts and trying to adjust the rest of it to the fact that those parts have come out.
I probably should have asked you this even before we did the interview. Is there a publisher ready to go with it? Or then after it's done, you're going to sell it to somebody, or you're going to publish it yourself? What is the prospects of it? And this is
I,
good, by the way, for viewers to understand what the process is for people who writing books about the Bronx.
right. I'm not the best person to tell them. I don't have much of an idea. I want to get
Okay.
an agent and a regular publisher. I don't want to try and publish it myself, but I really have been so busy writing, I haven't looked much in that
Wow.
direction yet.
Do you write every day?
Yes.
You do write every day. Wow.
Yeah.
And are you the sort that just hates what you wrote sometimes and you throw it you throw it away, or do you find that what you write, everything has a little value to it?
I mean, there's stuff that I want to change and that needs to be improved and polished, and I'll look at stuff and say, how did I think that
Yeah.
was good enough?
Who is that?
But
Listen, we got to run, Dave. David Wayne. The book is The Invisible Hand. It digs into Bronx history. I love the fact that you created another scenario that people said, "Wait a minute, that's just like what happened over there in the Bronx in the '70s." Thank you so much for joining us and having just this kind of comfortable conversation. And when The Invisible Hand comes out, or you get another Brio Award or whatever it is, you let us know.
thank you, Gary.
Great, no problem. All right, folks, that will do it for the Bronx Buzz. We've had a great show. Thanks to Jonathan Custodio. Thanks to David Wayne, who you just heard. And you know what happens next? I always say this. We'll see you next week. Good night.